If you do want to drag people into court physically, what are you going to do when they refuse to stop screaming at the top of their lungs? And what are you going to do then when they're screaming abuse at the victims in the public gallery? Are you going to gag them and wheel them into court? All right, well, who wants to put the gag on the biting, frenzied psychopath? And when you have dragged them and gagged them, Callum, and their muffled, hysterical laughter and their gleeful rocking to and fro at the recital of their crimes drives the families of victims to new despair, are we as a British justice system then going to reach for the sedatives?
Somebody in, for example, in the situation of Lucy Letby, can sort of really insult the families of victims by not showing up. In your experience, is that the reality here? Is it one sort of final jab at those that have been on the receiving end, that have been victims?
There are different reasons that can be behind it. But look, caveat, I've not been at the bar now for some time. But on this, I don't think much has changed or will change. And it also means that I'm free to speak as I think. I respect Robert Buckland a great deal. I thought he was a good Lord Chancellor. And I think his compromise about live links into the cell, which they can't turn off, is a good one. But the point is that what do you want to do with people who refuse to attend their sentencing hearing? Do you actually want to drag them into court physically? Because I truly understand the strong emotions at play here. But you've got to think about the practicalities. Are you actually going to force someone physically into the box?
And is that what it would require, do you think? It's interesting to consider the practicalities, and you've got insight on that would be helpful to understand, Alex. If somebody's kind of rebelling as an offender, talk to us about the kind of situations you can find yourselves in with such people.
Well, from time to time, I had clients who didn't want to appear for sentencing, and I did more violence and less fewer cases like the ones we're talking about here. But each time, as it happens, my clients in those examples were kind of burly thugs with histories of violence, and the court staff were visibly relieved by their absence from the dock. But if you do want to drag people into court physically, what are you going to do when they refuse to stop screaming at the top of their lungs? And what are you going to do then when they're screaming abuse at the victims in the public gallery? Are you going to gag them and wheel them into court? All right, well, who wants to put the gag on the biting, frenzied psychopath? And when you have dragged them and gagged them, Callum, and their muffled, hysterical laughter and their gleeful rocking to and fro at the recital of their crimes drives the families of victims to new despair, are we as a British justice system then going to reach for the sedatives? Look, I mean, I get the fury, I really do. And I also get the point about justice being seen to be done. But I think the compromise of putting a link to their cell they can't avoid is a better one than telling people that they've got to literally physically compel violent people into a compressed space. I do think the poor, low-paid guys and girls who'd have to do this deserve a thought as well.
And I suppose with that in mind, you do maintain some element of control. If they start behaving badly, you can mute them or you can turn them off the screen or whatever and just remove them from the situation at no real cost, if you like, to anyone.
Correct. I think the court keeping control is important. Look, Callum, I'd also be open to it being a separate offence not to attend with dignity.
So this is interesting, yeah. So the idea here is that if they don't show up, then actually they would be, fined or have a sentence added? Yeah. How would that work? What would the reality of that be?
Correct. Upon conviction for serious offence and not prior, and bear in mind you'd then have to prove they'd failed to attend the hearing, and that it was down to their doing and not some other reason that they'd not been present. It could be a separate offence not to attend your sentence. But Callum, I've got to tell you, saying to somebody facing a life sentence they'll get a few weeks added on, or they'll get 6 months added on to their sentence if they don't sit still and stop lashing out and screaming, will make no difference at all to some people. So, look, it's not a principal point at all. I think these people should face the justice that they receive. Just practically, what is the actual solution that you want? And for me, it's very difficult to see one. I think the Buckland compromise is excellent.
Is there anything in considering that the victims should have more of a say here, that they should almost have a well-informed choice of how to decide whether they wish to see a person face to face for sentencing. And by well informed, I mean issuing the sort of warnings that you have, Alex. You know, that this person could be disruptive, could be aggressive, etc. But actually, should we allow the victims or those impacted by a crime in some way to have more say in this sort of situation?
I'm hugely sympathetic to victims of crime. It's one of the reasons that I went into the law in the first place. But Callum, I'm afraid I have a very unfashionable answer on this. And it's that when we bring a prosecution in this country, we don't bring it in the name of the victim. We bring it in the name of the state. We bring it as a crown against that person. And we do that to demonstrate that we're not just exercising retribution, one clan against another, one tribe against another, one family against another. It's the state punishing somebody for doing something wrong. I welcome victims giving statements about the impact of crimes upon them and things like that. But in the end, it's not the victim that decides what happens to somebody. It's the state, which is meant to be more impartial and able to demonstrate a fairness throughout the process. I think so. My unfashionable answer is I'd rather, in the end, judges decide these things than victims' families.
Yeah. Alex, it's really fascinating, very thought provoking. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Callum.
Thank you for joining us. Alex Dean there, a political commentator and former lawyer.